Some events remain in the dark, not because they are unsolvable, but because they are never truly addressed. This story is one of them. There is no single explosion, no single moment, no single everything changed here point. When looking at official records, what happened appeared disconnected. Events occurring on different dates, different names, different explanations. And each one, when considered individually, was deemed reasonable, letting no one object, stopping no one, forcing no one to say, there is a problem here. This is exactly where the real problem began. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing is not irrationality, but logic that appears too orderly. In this case, no one panics. No one mentions an extraordinary situation. No record bears an urgent stamp. Each event is explained within its own context. Each cause takes its place on its own line. Each explanation is neatly placed where it belongs. But these pieces are never brought side by side. No one stops to ask this. If everything is so orderly, why do these events start to revolve around the same story? Because this question is not asked, events do not grow, they do not deepen, and they never create a real disturbance. Because systems only slow down when they see a clear contradiction. Here, there is no clear contradiction. There is only repetition. Same period, same environment, similar contacts, but different results. And this difference is enough to make everything look safe. If there were an extraordinary cause, it should have affected everyone. If there were no cause at all, no one should have been affected. But what happens here is not exactly that. Some are affected, some are not affected at all. Those who enter the same conditions emerge with completely different results. This situation does not ease the case. On the contrary, it leaves it in an unexplainable gap in between. Because the extraordinary does not act selectively, and the ordinary does not produce this much repetition. That is why no explanation fully fits into place, and that is why no explanation is completely excluded. There is no clear wrong, but there is no satisfying truth either. There are only questions that are not brought side by side. And we are here not to retell what actually happened, but to understand why it was never treated as a single thing. Because sometimes the real mystery is hidden not in what happens, but in the place that is looked at but not seen. And if all of these records are correct, then only one disturbing possibility remains. Perhaps it was not because this story could never be solved, but because it did not seem solvable, that it was never truly paused upon and considered. At this point, there was not a single event to be solved, but for the first time, there was a place where the same conditions, in the same environment, within the same time interval, produced different results. This place was the point where consistency on paper first came into contact with reality, and this difference had been accepted as ordinary the moment it was first recorded. Because when looked at individually, none of them draw attention. When they come side by side, they form a void that no one has looked at yet. By 1803, England was in the midst of a silent transformation. Industry was growing, trade was accelerating, port towns were falling silent earlier at night. But the order was still old. The police force was not centralized. Each region carried its own burden. The places where the events occurred were not large cities. They were small settlements sustained by trade, easily overlooked on maps. Houses near ports, narrow streets, shop fronts that darkened at night. In these towns, night was not seen as a dangerous time. Doors were locked, lights were extinguished, silence was ordinary. Street lamps burned at sparse intervals. After the rain, stone roads glistened in the dark. Night watchmen patrolled the same routes at the same hours. This order had continued unchanged for years. The first events took place right in the middle of this silence. A loss noticed toward morning in a house. In another place, a single object taken from the back room of a shop. Objects that could often be considered worthless. Sometimes a single tool taken from a drawer. Sometimes an object standing at the back of a shelf that no one used in daily life. While there was money in the house, the money had not been touched. The silvers were in place. The clothes had not been disturbed. The doors were in place. The windows were intact. There was no sign of forced entry. The homeowners were inside. No one had heard a sound. No one had woken up. The idea that a stranger might have wandered through the house during the night was more disturbing than the loss noticed in the morning. But this discomfort lasted short. because it seemed as if there was no unexplainable situation. Therefore, the first records were kept short. Events were written under the heading of petty theft. Similar sentences appeared in every record. No forced entry. Homeowner was inside. No noise was heard. Because there was no sense of a masterfully planned crime, there was no rush, nor was there any panic to erase the tracks. On the contrary, the impression remained that the thief acted comfortably, as if they had time, as if they were competing with no one. Some homeowners recounted wandering around the house for a while when they woke up in the morning. They said they didn't immediately notice what was missing. This reinforced the insignificant feel of the theft. Each event was written in its own ledger. It was noted that the doors were locked. It was added that the homeowners heard nothing. It was stated that nothing else in the house was touched. But these details remained solitary. They did not come side by side. They were not gathered under one heading. The attitude of the authorities was composed. Each case was assigned to a different officer. Each was evaluated within itself. Files were opened on different days, left on different desks, filled with different handwriting. No one acted negligently. No one neglected their duty. But no one asked this question either. Why are these so similar? Because similarity was not visible when looked at individually. Each event belonged to a different night, to a different house, to a different complaint. And each one, when looked at on its own, could be explained. The public was uneasy, but not afraid. The things discussed were familiar. Carelessness, newly arrived strangers, life getting harder. Some changed their door locks. Some began to leave night lamps on. But no one abandoned their home. No one stayed sleepless at night. No one saw these as links in a chain. And so, within a few weeks, the same types of events recurred. Again, small losses. Again, quiet nights. Again, closed doors. The same details were rewritten in different files. But this repetition remained only within the records. There was no crime wave. There was no panic. There was no perception of a threat. But for the first time, the records had begun to repeat the same words. And this repetition showed that a threshold had formed, one that no one had stopped to look at yet. These repetitions were still meaningful when looked at individually. Each date belonged to its own night. Each record told its own event. But as the lines increased, not only what was missing, but in what order they went missing began to become noticeable. There were days between some nights. Some had come weeks later. But the gaps between them were not irregular. The same words were reappearing on different dates. At this point, the issue moved out of the houses and into the ledgers. Now, what needed to be looked at was not the doors, but how the reports were arranged. Because not the silence itself, but the way the silence repeated had begun to attract attention. And the question slowly shifted. Not why these events happened, but why they were recorded in this order. After the first few weeks, the records began to increase. Cases that remained ordinary when looked at individually became more frequent in the ledgers. The same statements were rewritten on different dates. This repetition initially stood as only a statistical detail. For the reading eye, it was ordinary, familiar, and temporary. This increase did not create a sudden alarm in the local police records, because what happened had not changed in quality. Neither the value of the items taken had risen, nor had the method differed. Only the pages were starting to fill. The thickening of the ledgers did not increase the weight of the events. Each report was kept with a similar structure. The date was written, the address was cited. The item taken was described in a short statement. The homeowner's declaration was conveyed. It was noted whether there was forced entry. This structure provided an organized and reassuring framework. This information is as simple and clear as the official language requires. There is no commentary. No connection is established. No reference is made to previous cases. The text limits itself to recording only what happened. Causes or possibilities do not seep into the lines. The same officer sometimes fills out a similar report again weeks later, but there is no need to go back and look at the previous page, because the system limits each event to its own day. The past remains only in the archive. The present is evaluated on its own. As the timeline progresses, gaps form between cases. Some arrive a few days apart. Others emerge weeks later. These intervals appear irregular, but the language used remains surprisingly constant. The same words find their place again on different dates. The door was locked. The homeowner was inside. No sound was heard. These sentences repeat in different handwriting on different dates. However, the repetition remains within the text. The sentences themselves do not change, only their dates change. Physical evidence is limited. There are no footprints, there is no forced window, there is no clutter in the house indicating haste. These absences fuel not suspicion, but calmness. When the stolen items are examined, no common purpose is perceived. Neither money is prioritized, nor easily sellable objects. Some pieces only gain meaning through the habits of the homeowner. This reinforces the impression that the theft is coincidental, not personal. Witness statements are kept short, because witnesses usually have seen nothing. There is no sound heard, there is no movement noticed. No suspicious face can be described. Silence becomes the common point of the statements. This situation does not complicate the investigation, but it does not necessitate deepening it either, because there seems to be no crime to be solved in the classical sense. Everything remains within explainable limits. Authorities evaluate the files within themselves. Each case starts and ends on the page where it is found. One report does not rely on another. One date does not call for the next. Since connections are not established, questions do not grow either. Thus, the investigation seems to progress, but it does not expand. New records are added, but old records are not reread retrospectively. As the ledgers fill, the perspective remains fixed. The first real blockage begins here, because there is an explanation for the events, but the sequence of the events remains outside the explanation. Time exists only as a recording element. When looking at the records, it now becomes visible not only what was missing, but at what intervals it went missing. However, this visibility does not yet produce a meaning. Numbers increase, but the interpretation does not change. The investigation falls silent at this exact point, because the information at hand is not wrong, but when they come together, they do not say anything new. Those that are true refuse to speak together, and while the files increase in number, they remain in place in terms of meaning. The records appear complete in this form. There is no lack, there is no error. But this order, strangely, does not reassure anyone, because while the explanations are sufficient on paper, they do not create the same effect in daily life. Ledgers are closed, reports are put away. However, the feeling inside the houses does not coincide with the calmness in the records. And at this exact point, the issue ceases to be merely what remains in the ledgers, because even if what has happened has been recorded, an unrecorded weight forms for the people who have to live with them. The events have been explained, but the effect they left has not been explained. This silently moves the question elsewhere. What have these experiences left in people? Records are closed, ledgers are put back in their places. The official process is considered complete within itself. But the effect left by the events continues to live somewhere outside the records. Those who suffer from theft do not define themselves as victims. Most minimize their words when describing what happened. The phrase, "it was something insignificant," is frequently used. This sentence reflects the need to suppress the experience rather than explain it, because there is a discomfort that is difficult to describe. Words are chosen to distance oneself from what happened. One wants to leave the event behind, but it cannot be fully left. Inside the houses, rather than a material loss, an invisible boundary seems to have been violated. The taken item is remembered, but what is more lasting is the thought of having been entered unnoticed. This thought seeps silently into daily life. The house stands as it used to, but it does not feel as it used to. There are those who wake up at night. When a sound is heard, it takes longer to decide what it is. In the mornings, a brief but careful glance wanders inside the house. This glance is aimed more at convincing oneself that everything is in its place, rather than understanding if something is missing. These behaviors are not exaggerated. No one says they are afraid, because fear requires a specific threat. Here, the threat is not defined. The feeling is more about uncertainty. It stems not from something known, but from a situation whose nature cannot be fully described.
Some homeowners make small arrangements after the incident. The positions of items change, drawers are reorganized. These changes do not carry a security purpose. Rather, they are an effort to recall the feeling that control of the house is still theirs. Order turns not into a defense, but into a balancing tool. This effect is not limited directly to those who suffer from theft. Neighbors also become a part of the process. The event ceases to be individual. It turns into an environmental unease. It is discussed, kept short, then other topics are moved to. What is left unsaid is more lasting than what is said. Sentences are left half-finished, completed with looks. A similar tension forms on the side of the authorities. The files are complete. Procedures have been operated correctly. Despite this, an internal feeling of dissatisfaction appears while closing some reports. This feeling is not voiced, because when it is voiced, it must be justified. An officer stands at their desk for a short time after closing the file. Dates are correct. Statements have been taken. Still, what is closed is only the file, not the question. The question remains there without leaving the papers. This unease does not become an institutional problem. The official process does not change. Rather, a careful distance develops. Each new case is handled independently of the old one. The system facilitates this. Each event kept separate makes the total effect invisible.
Thus, the human factor becomes isolated. Homeowners cannot fully explain what they feel. Authorities cannot solidify what they notice. A weight is formed, shared between the two sides, but unnamed. This weight is fed not by a shared experience, but by a shared deficiency. A distinct criminal figure does not emerge in society. No one speaks of a specific person. Crime does not gain a face. This situation does not gain fear. It makes it directionless. People become cautious not against a specific threat, but against an uncertain possibility. Caution turns from a defense into a habit. This cautiousness disperses into daily life. Doors are checked. Lights are turned off a little later. But when viewed from the outside, everything is ordinary. Life continues to flow. The distance between what is seen and what is felt widens. This weight is felt exactly here. What happens is neither completely ordinary, nor can it be considered extraordinary. This state of being caught in between produces a constant pressure in people's minds. There are explanations. There is no relief. There is information. There is no certainty. What happens is in a state that can be told, but it cannot be internalized. Because what is lasting is not the events themselves, but what they leave behind. These traces appear neither in reports nor in statistics.
And some crimes deepen exactly here, not in the records, but in the feelings that people are forced to carry silently. When the records are closed and one looks back, it seems as if everything that needed to be done has been done. Files are completed, the process has been operated, decisions have been made. Law has stood where it should within its own criteria. However, this stance does not produce the same clarity for everyone who comes into contact with what happened, because the official closing does not end the social and individual impact of the events. It only pushes them outside the boundaries of the system. From this point on, the issue becomes less about what happened and more about how the events were responded to. While the law handles events one by one, it is not responsible for filling the remaining gaps. Those gaps form not around the files, but around the decisions. And exactly for this reason, the event now shifts from the feelings people carry towards how far the official mechanisms can reach. What follows is the story not of closed files, but of why those files did not create a convincing end. What remains after the files are closed is not a single big question. Rather, small possibilities remain that do not fully leave the mind. When thought of individually, they are not disturbing. In fact, most are logical. But when they come side by side, they create an unease that settles inside a person. At this point, no one is in pursuit of new information. There is no missing document or evidence waiting to be found. Everything that exists is already known. The real issue is how what is known comes together, or more accurately, why they were never truly brought together. The first possibility that comes to mind is simple. Perhaps there is no special connection between what happened. It is just a coincidence that similar small thefts occur in similar places during the same periods. Records are similar because everyone keeps records in the same way. Events appear to repeat because the language of narration is the same. This thought is comfortable. It requires nothing extra. It can be accepted without question for a long time. But this comfort cannot carry every detail. It struggles to explain why some nights were so close, why some houses were consistently left out. Coincidence fills many gaps, but it cannot keep them all upright at the same time. After a while, another possibility comes to mind. Perhaps there is someone who knows the environment well. someone not foreign to the layout of the houses, who knows the hours and manages to move silently. The fact that the doors were not forced and that no one noticed anything while the homeowners were inside aligns with this thought. Even the worthlessness of the items taken can be explained by the comfort of someone not in a hurry. But this possibility also falters in some places. If someone is truly so dominant, why do some nights pass with nothing happening? Why are some houses not affected repeatedly, while others remain completely excluded? And why does a movement that appears so calm leave almost no trace behind? This God explains many things, but every explanation brings another question with it. Then an even simpler possibility comes to mind. Perhaps there is no clear plan at all. Maybe everything is the result of momentary decisions. The inconsistency of the items taken supports this. Neither money is prioritized nor sellability. Sometimes a tool, sometimes a forgotten object. This perspective explains the disorder. But this time, the recurring timings in similar records draw attention. It is not easy for a behavior that appears scattered to leave such similar traces. Thus, the possibilities collide at one point. None of them are completely wrong, but none of them cover everything. Each one illuminates a part of what happened, leaving the other part in the shade. The real darkness gathers exactly in these non-overlapping areas.
After a while, the direction of the questions changes. The questions, who did it, or why did it happen, remain in the background. A quieter curiosity takes their place. More than the events themselves, how they are handled begins to draw attention. Events have been handled individually, and each has been explained within itself. But what these explanations say when brought together has not been much considered. This situation does not stand as a glaring error. On the contrary, there is a regular and smooth flow. Everything is in its place. But precisely this order causes some possibilities to never emerge, because thought remains within customary boundaries. Questions that go beyond those boundaries vanish before they are even asked. What is felt here is not a great unsolved secret. Rather, it is a landscape that has not been looked at for a long enough time. There are pieces, details are clear, but stepping back and looking at the whole has never been tried. What follows is not a search for a definitive answer. Rather, it begins to notice why some possibilities always remain incomplete. Because sometimes a story remains incomplete not because of wrong answers, but because the right questions were never asked.
And the remaining feeling is exactly this. Possibilities silently pushed aside, questions lost before they were ever born. And despite all this, a sense of deficiency that cannot find its place in the mind. Over time, these thefts cease to be individual events. It is not remembered which item was taken from which house, or which street was affected on which night. What remains is a series of nights that were experienced, but could not fully find their place. Thefts that occurred while the doors were closed, the windows were intact, and the homeowners were inside. Nights explained according to the records, but never closed in memory. These events were never remembered as a major crime wave, because neither the items taken were major losses, nor was there any overt violence. No one was injured, no one was directly threatened. Therefore, the thefts were classified as small over time, not because they were small, but because they did not appear large. But this classification did not eliminate what happened. On the contrary, it moved them to a silent place, to a place that does not disturb people's night sleep, but causes a brief pause inside the house in the morning, to a place that forces one to stop and think for a moment inside the house when a drawer is opened or a look is cast behind a shelf. The legacy left by these thefts is not material. Stolen items are replaced over time, lost objects are forgotten, but the perception of order inside the houses does not return as before, because the issue is not what was stolen. The real issue is that someone was able to enter and leave without being noticed, and that how this was possible never became clear. Over the years, these thefts remain in official records as closed files. There are dates, there are addresses, there are short descriptions, but none of these records fully meet the feeling that people experience, because theft is not just taking an item and leaving, it is also silently crossing a boundary. And when this boundary is crossed, the same question always remains. How did this happen? This question is not asked loudly over time. No one talks about the theft constantly, but the question does not disappear completely either. It shows itself in short conversations between neighbors, in night lamps being turned off a little later, in checking the door a second time. The theft may have ended, but the state of caution it created becomes permanent.
Therefore, this series is not merely a chain of unsolved thefts. It is also the result of an order that was not deemed necessary to be solved. Events were explained sufficiently when handled individually. Each theft was evaluated on its own, in its own night. But why these thefts recurred in such a similar way, why they always took place in the same silence, and why they continued so without leaving a trace was never truly discussed. Perhaps this is the most disturbing part. There is a thief, or there is not. There is more than one, or there is not. None of these becomes certain. But the only thing that is certain is this. These thefts remained in the dark not because they could not be solved, but because it was not thought they should be solved. And what remains is this: houses with locked doors, silent nights, missing but items considered insignificant, and in the middle of all this, a question whose answer has never been fully given. If everything is so ordinary, why do these thefts still feel as if they have not found their place?